Hello, and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, and I am the Faithful Stamper. Thank you for joining me today for the Triple Pop-Up Cube card technique. This is a really great technique for a fun card that looks very impressive, but probably isn't as complicated to make as you might think. This card does fold flat to mail. However, it does not fit in a standard card size envelope. You will need an envelope that is at least 6 by 6 to mail this card. So here's a view from the top, and then here's the front view of what the card looks like when it's standing open on the table. So I have my sentiment on the inside and then Pretty Designer Series paper on the outside. So let me show you how to make this card. I'm going to bring over my paper trimmer scorer and open the extendable arm because I have a piece of cardstock that is 12 by 12. This is Rococo Rose. And so the first step is to take my cardstock and I'm going to cut 1/2 inch off one side so that it is 11.5 inches wide. And with that 11.5 inch side at the top, I'm going to do some scoring. So not cutting, just scoring the paper. So I keep my cutting blade down at the bottom and my score blade up at the top. And that way, hopefully, I won't get confused. But I'm going to score once at 2 3/4 inches. Slide down to 5.5. Over to 8 1/4, and one more at 11 inches. Now, I'm going to take my cardstock and turn it counterclockwise. So I have my 1/2 inch scored panel at the top, and now I'm going to do some cutting. So first, I'm going to cut a strip that is 2 3/4. And now I'm going to repeat that again. So another strip that is 2 3/4. Set that aside. And my final cut will be at 5.5 inches. So the only piece that I'm not going to use is this strip here on the end, so that can be set aside to either recycle or use in a different project. And now I can set my trimmer to the side. So I have one large panel, which will form the back of our card, and 2 panels that'll form our cubes. Now the next thing I want to do is take my bone folder, and I'm going to burnish all the score lines. I'm going to quickly fold them by hand. And then I'm going to go back over them very quickly with my bone folder to just crisp them up. It provides a really nice presentation when I put together the finished card. And so I just want to repeat those simple steps on all 3 of these panels. And you can do this with your fingers if you don't have a bone folder. Just try to make nice crisp folds. That'll just ease you it'll aid you as you assemble your card. So almost done. One final score and burnish. And now I'm ready to assemble my panels. What I like to do is lay my panels out so that all 3 of them are facing up with the 1/2 inch panel folded towards me and facing up, because that's where I'm going to put my adhesive. Now for these pieces, I like to use tear-in tape. So this is double-sided tape, basically. And I find this very handy to use when assembling 3D projects, such as this pop-up card. Later in this project, you may want to have liquid glue handy. it depends on how comfortable you are using liquid glue versus tear and tape or double-sided adhesive such as this. So now I've got my tape secured. I'm going to peel off the backing, make sure I don't have any tape overhanging the edges, and just fold the card together. Make sure it's nice and straight. So this forms the back of my card, the larger rectangular cube. And I'm just going to repeat for the two smaller cubes. This card is not very difficult to assemble. It just takes a little time to get the feel of the card as you are putting it together. So now we're ready to assemble the card base. Take your larger rectangular cube and look for that seam where you use the tear and tape to put the cube together. Take that seam and turn it towards you. So if you were to fold it flat, you have your rough edge running right down the center of the card, your cut edge. And that seam is pointing right at you towards your belly button. Now take your two panels, your two smaller cubes, and if you fold them so your rough edge is in the middle, facing towards you, you want that rough edge to be on your tabletop. So I'm a very visual person, and so I like to just put the card together, so to speak, on my tabletop so I know where exactly my tape needs to go. So I'm going to flatten this cube, and I know this is where my tape needs to go. So here you may want to use liquid glue. It gives you a little more maneuverability when you are attaching the small cubes to the larger rectangle. However, I'm going to be honest, I am not a huge fan of liquid glue. I usually have more trouble with it than not. So since I'm a little more comfortable with tear and tape, I'm going to use tear and tape. But if you feel better using liquid glue, use liquid glue. So now I'm going to peel the backing off this panel, or the backing off the tear and tape for this panel. And so I've got that seam pointing towards me. I'm just going to flip the card and flatten it. And what I need to do is line up the bottom corner and the inside line. So I've got my tape at the bottom, and I'm just going to line up that bottom corner and then lay that flat right along the half of the card. And so this is one cube, and we're just going to repeat on the other side of the card. So again, tear and tape or liquid glue, whatever works best for you. Liquid glue will not immediately adhere to the card the way tear and tape does. So you have a little more room to pick it back up and start over if you're not quite happy with where your card ended up. But as I said, not a fan of the liquid glue here. So I've been brave and bold with my tear and tape. So now I'm just taking off the backing, making sure my tape is pressed down. And again, line up your bottom corner. This piece is easier because you've got this cube on the right to match up your paper with, but I like to match up the bottom corner and that bottom line, and then straight as can be. And so this is the base for my card. Now don't worry, if you stand your card up, you might think that's not standing up right. It's okay. It just needs a little coaxing. So lay the card flat and just run your hands over it. Now flip your cubes back up and then flip them down one more time, a little more coaxing. And so now the paper is just a little bit more broken in, and now your cubes sit flat on the table. So hopefully you can see that. Now it's all about the decorating. You will need cardstock squares that are 2.5 inches square. You will need 12 of them, so 12 2.5-inch squares, or depending on what kind of paper you've selected or what design you want for your card, you could do 6 and 6. I'll show you some samples with that layout after I'm done putting this card together. And you will need 6 squares that are 2 1/4 inch of designer series paper, or DSP as we call it in Stampin' Up! Land. So 6 printed papers, and then 12 2.5-inch squares, either all one color or 6 and 6. And I went ahead and glued the other 5 squares, but this you can go back to your tape runner or use liquid glue if you prefer. This is our Stampin' Seal Plus, our fabulous adhesive tape runner. And I'm just going to layer these together. And now it's a matter of assembling these by putting these on your card. And I find it's easiest to lay the card flat, but I like to lay out my 6 designer series paper panels. And that way, when I lay them out, I can make sure I don't have the same design together next to each other or whatnot. So I'm just going to juggle my squares a little bit. I think I like them that way. So there's no particular order. You can start at the top, start at the bottom. I think I'll start at the bottom. Just a little bit of adhesive, enough that you're sure it's not going anywhere. And then, since I started from the bottom, my bottom left, just center it on your little cube panel and repeat. And so you're just going to continue to do this until all 6 of your panels are decorated. This piece will probably take you the longest, just arranging and gluing each panel on the front of your card. But once you get the hang of it, you can be churning these out in no time at all. So there's number 5. And the final one. And then once I get all these panels in place, I just like to give them a little press. Make sure they're not going anywhere. And then you can see my card is almost complete. If you like the way the card looks, you can leave it perfectly fine, just like this. I'm going to take the remaining 6 squares of cardstock though, and I'm going to put them inside the small cubes. So along the back and the bottom, and then the last 2 will go on the inside back of the tall piece. It's just a way to dress it up a little bit. For these pieces, you may want to use liquid glue, particularly on the top inside pieces. I'll show you in a minute why it's a little tricky to get to those. But what I like to do for the bottom is I leave the card standing up and I turn it sideways so I can see what I'm doing and I can line up my square perfectly on the inside. And I just repeat this on each side. Now for the backs of the cubes, once my adhesive is on, I like to lay the card flat. And I press one cube down so that I have one standing up, and I can peek inside again and see where I want my card stock to be. So a little tip for you there. And as you put yours together, you'll find what works for you. So I'm just going to reverse for this other side. Give that a press. Now, for the inside pieces on the back of the card, you can stand the card up and swivel if you like, but a little tip for you, something I found works for me, is once I put the adhesive on the back of the card stock panel, I actually like to keep the card standing up because I can hold the panel with my fingers and kind of with my other thumb hold it in place and then press the cardstock in. And I find that's a little less fussy for me to position these pieces of cardstock where I want them. So do whatever is most comfortable for you. So here's the last one. Again, I can kind of eyeball and hold this in place. This is where, if you're worried about getting everything straight, use the liquid glue. Give it a press. And there is the card, and there's only one step left to do, and that is to put a sentiment on the card. Now I could very easily just put a sentiment on the top of the little cubes, but I want to do something a little different. So I'm going to take a scrap of So Saffron, it matches the Designer Series paper, and I'm using a stamp from the Here's a Card stamp set that says Happy Birthday. So this is a red rubber stamp, so it has a cushion. I don't need to put anything underneath of it. It has a built-in cushion. So I have some Old Olive ink. I'm going to tap gently. I always turn my stamps over, make sure I have enough ink. If I'm not sure I do, I just tap it again, gently. And then I'm going to press 1, 2, 3, not too hard. And there I have a nice crisp image. If I were to blur my image, I would just flip the piece of cardstock over and restamp on the back. So now I'm going to take my tailored tag punch and punch out my sentiment. My ink is already dried. Our dye-based inks dry very quickly. And so this is going to be my sentiment. But obviously, since my card bends and folds, I can't just glue it in. So we have a little mechanism to attach the sentiment. One thing to take note of, I like to take a peek at my card and see what color I should use to attach my sentiment. I wouldn't want something that's going to really stand out. So for this card, since I used the mint macaron on the inside squares, I'm going to use 2 scraps of the mint macaron to attach my sentiment. I could use the same yellow, but it would stand out a little bit more. And I'll tell you, I learned this through trial and error. The first card that I made, I attached the sentiment with white, and I could see it. But you need 2 strips of cardstock that are about 2 inches long, and they need to be just a little bit less wide than your sentiment. So for example, this is my tailored tag punch, and my strips here are exactly the same width. I recommend going a little bit smaller if you're using just a rectangle, say a 1-inch square rectangle with your sentiment on. Use 3/4 of an inch because you don't want it to appear above the top and the bottom of the end of your sentiment. You'll see what I mean once I put it together. So I'm just going to by hand fold these in half. Since these are small strips, I can do that. And I'm just going to repeat for the second strip. And what I like to do is I like to put the strips together and take one piece of tear and tape and layer these together at the same time. You can do them one by one, but I found this works a little bit better for me. And so I've got my little pieces attached. Peel the backing off. I'm going to take my sentiment and flip it over to the back. And I'm going to attach these little cardstock scraps in the middle. I'm going to take advantage of this line here to line it up. And put it right in the middle of my sentiment. So now I have my sentiment with this interesting little V piece. But we're going to put adhesive on the inside of the V and then attach it inside the card. Again, you may want liquid glue if you're not comfortable with adhesive or the double-sided tape. And you could, if you like, instead of putting the sentiment on the inside of the card, which this is the trickiest part right here, is trying to attach. But again, not all that tricky. But if you're worried about it, put it here on the top. It's the same concept as what I just did and what I'll show you here, but a little less fussy because you're not trying to get in between these cubes. So I'm going to take one last piece of tear and tape and press it on the other side of my little V. And what I found works best with working with inside, make sure your sentiment is right way up. I almost glued it upside down there. I like to kind of hold open the card with my hand because then I can kind of maneuver it a little bit and see what I'm doing. I'm going to take the V from the back of the sentiment and attach, and I can kind of see where I want that to be. I put it a little too high. This is where liquid glue is more your friend. Try again here. There we go. Holding it upside down really works the best. And now I can kind of see as I start to flatten it, even though my cubes are coming together, I can see that it's straight and it's centered. I press inside the cubes. Now I give it a press this way. And there's my sentiment, which will pop up when the card is open. And as you can tell, if I hold it, so you can see, this is why the matching cardstock is important, so that it doesn't stand out on that panel. Hopefully you can see that. So there is our pop-up cube card. So it's a very impressive card that looks like it would be difficult to make, but it isn't as difficult as you might think. So I have a few more samples to show you. The next sample is another example using just Designer Series paper. And this card uses 6 squares of the dark cardstock, the Early Espresso, and 6 of the Bumblebee. And you can see on this card, this is the one I use the white, and obviously it stands out. That bothers me. So if I were to make this card again, I would use the Bumblebee, so it camouflages a little better. But you can see, lovely card that anyone would be impressed with. But you don't just have to use Designer Series paper. You can, but you can step it up a little. This is from our Pampered Pet Suite, and so I do have the DSP on the cubes. However, I also took the Designer Series paper and I fussy cut 4 of the sweet little doggies, and then I popped them on the front of the card with dimensionals. So this is a little bit different, a little step up from the simple attaching of the DSP. And it says, I hope your day is a real treat. And if this is a birthday card or whatever kind of card you might make it for, you could flip it over and write your message here on the back. Next, I had some fun with stamping. Whoop. This is our Zany Zebra set. This is Bermuda Bay and Melon Mambo. I wanted a fun card. It might be great for kids. And so I just used the stamp set and stamped on the panels and did just a little die cutting with some of the sentiments in the set. And then I have that happy birthday that pops in the inside. So again, you don't just have to use paper, you can use stamps as well. Another fun one that we have is our Way to Goat stamp set. This can be birthday or congratulations or something like that. There's lots of great sentiments here. These I stamped and then colored with our Stampin' Blends. The inside says, "You're the goat, the greatest of all time." And it says happy birthday as well. My favorite is, "I got you a cake, but I ate it." And Way to Goat. So again, another fun card using a stamp set. And then this last card, I caked it up just a little bit. I made a Christmas card with our Coming Home stamp set. And this one I added just a couple extra pieces. The main concept is the same, but I used designer series paper in the 2.5-inch square, so I didn't layer any extra here. I just used the designer series paper on the fronts of the cubes and the inside and the bottoms. I have my sentiment, just like all the other cards, on the inside at the bottom, but I took the stamp set that matches this paper and I colored and die cut the little house and the little car and the Christmas tree. And I used embossed cardstock panels here. But I attached the card, the house, on the top of the card, just as I attached the inside sentiment. Same concept with those little strips of paper in the V. But then when I was finished, I took a single strip of paper and attached the tree and the little car hauling the Christmas tree, and made it so that they stand up on the card. If you're going to do something like this to kick it up a notch, just a word to the wise, watch your positioning before you do what I did and attach the tree. If you've got a tall image, I should have put the tree further to the front of the card, because if I were to fold this up for mailing, my tree sticks out the top. And if I were to somehow close it, it would still bend the top of the Christmas tree. So this one's probably going to be just a decoration. But very sweet and a very fun card, and people will say, wow, how'd you make it? That must have been terribly hard, but it's not as hard as they think. So I hope you enjoyed the triple pop-up cube card technique. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out more of my videos. I'm Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper. Happy crafting!